The chamber of the Galactic Council fell into absolute silence as High Arbiter Kethros rose from his crystalline throne. His 4 eyes swept across the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds, each species more ancient than the last, each having walked among the stars for millennia before humanity had even discovered fire. "Bring forth the accused," Kethros commanded, his voice resonating through the acoustically perfect dome that had stood at the heart of galactic governance for over 100,000 standard cycles. The massive doors at the chamber's base groaned open, and through them walked 3 human beings. Ambassador Sarah Chen led the delegation, her spine straight despite the gravity that pressed down upon her shoulders, both literal and metaphorical. The Council's homeworld, Nexus Prime, maintained gravity 17% higher than Earth standard, a fact that she was certain was no coincidence when it came to hosting these particular proceedings. Behind her walked Admiral Marcus Stone, his dress uniform adorned with medals that told stories the aliens couldn't begin to comprehend, and Dr. Yuki Tanaka, humanity's foremost xenoanthropologist and the woman who had spent 3 decades trying to teach Earth's leaders how to navigate galactic politics. The 3 of them had been given no notice. They had been summoned from their respective posts across human space, brought to Nexus Prime on a Council courier ship that had traveled faster than anything in humanity's fleet could match, and deposited before this ancient body without explanation. Now they stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the representatives of species that had been building empires when humanity's ancestors were still living in caves. "Humanity," Kethros began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You stand accused before this council." Sarah felt her heart skip, but her expression remained neutral. 3 decades of diplomatic training had taught her to control every micro-expression, every telltale sign of emotion. Whatever this was, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. "Accused of what, High Arbiter?" she asked, her voice steady. Kethros's mandibles clicked together, the Nexari equivalent of a condescending smile. "Perhaps you are unaware of the scope of your species' crimes. Let us illuminate you." He gestured with one elongated limb, and the air above the chamber floor came alive with holographic projections. Images of star systems, of planets, of orbital installations flickered into existence. 17 cycles ago, Kethros continued, humanity made first contact with the galactic community. You were welcomed, as all species are welcomed, into the fold of civilized peoples. You were given the standard development period, 100 cycles to adapt to the realities of interstellar society, to learn our ways, to integrate peacefully into the existing order. Sarah nodded. She remembered those early days well. She had been a young attaché then, barely out of the diplomatic academy, watching with wonder as humanity took its first tentative steps onto the galactic stage. In that time, Kethros went on, humanity was expected to remain within its designated sphere of influence. You were allocated 3 star systems for initial expansion, as is customary for developing species. These systems were carefully selected to contain no strategic resources, no pre-existing claims, no sources of conflict. The holographic display zoomed in on Sol and its 2 neighboring systems, Alpha Centauri and Barnard Star, the 3 systems that had been humanity's entire cosmic territory for the past 17 years. Instead, Kethros's voice took on a harder edge. Humanity has engaged in rampant, unauthorized expansion. You have claimed 17 additional systems beyond your allocation.
You have established military installations in direct violation of the developing species protocols. You have constructed warships in quantities far exceeding those permitted for your developmental stage. The display changed again, showing what Sarah recognized as the human colonial network, the systems they had fought so hard to settle, the worlds they had terraformed with the sweat of generations.
But these infractions, Kethros continued, pale in comparison to your most egregious crime. The chamber seemed to darken as a new image appeared. A planet, its surface a swirl of blue and green and white.
This world, Kethros said, was designated Sanctuary 7. It was a protected preserve, home to a pre-sapient species that the Council had nurtured for over 50,000 cycles. Our scientists projected that they would achieve sapience within the next 10,000 cycles, at which point they would have been welcomed into the galactic community as full members.
Sarah felt her blood run cold. She knew what was coming. Humanity, Kethros declared, has colonized this world. In doing so, you have disrupted the development of a species that was our responsibility. You have built cities on their ancestral lands. You have polluted their waters with your industries. And you have caused the extinction of the very species we sought to protect. The chamber erupted into cacophony. 1,000 alien voices rose in outrage, condemning humanity in languages that the translation implant in Sarah's skull struggled to keep up with. She stood perfectly still, her mind racing. This was bad. This was worse than bad. She could see Admiral Stone's jaw tightening, could sense Dr. Tanaka's scholarly mind already working to find some cultural context that might explain this situation. But Sarah knew there was no context that would save them here. The Council had made up its mind before they had even entered the chamber. This wasn't a trial, it was a sentencing. The penalty, Kethros announced, his voice cutting through the noise and silencing the chamber, has already been determined. He raised one limb, and the holographic display changed one final time. It now showed Earth, beautiful blue Earth, the cradle of humanity, the world that 8 billion people called home. Humanity's expansion privileges are hereby revoked. All colonial holdings beyond Sol System will be ceded to the Council for redistribution. All military assets will be surrendered for dismantlement. And Sol System itself will be placed under Council administration for a period of no less than 10,000 cycles, during which humanity will be re-educated in proper galactic citizenship. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah understood, in that moment, what she was really hearing. This wasn't a punishment, it was extermination by another name. 10,000 years of re-education under Council administration meant the end of human civilization as an independent entity. Their children's children's children, 100 generations hence, would grow up as subjects of alien masters, their culture and identity slowly erased and replaced with whatever the Council deemed appropriate. The sentence, Kethros continued, will be carried out immediately. Council enforcement fleets are already en route to Sol System and all human colonial holdings. Resistance will be met with the appropriate force. He turned his 4 eyes directly to Sarah. You have been brought here as a courtesy, Ambassador Chen, to witness the justice of the Council and to communicate our decision to your species. You may return to Earth aboard the vessel that brought you here, so that you may explain to your people why resistance is futile. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. Then, very slowly, she smiled.
It was not the smile of a diplomat. It was not the smile of someone who had just been handed a death sentence for her entire species. It was the smile of a predator, ancient and terrible. The smile of an apex species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain through intelligence and violence in equal measure. "High Arbiter," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly tense chamber. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Kethros's mandibles clicked in confusion. "There is no misunderstanding. The evidence is clear. The sentence has been passed." "Oh, I don't dispute any of that," Sarah replied. "The misunderstanding is on your end. You seem to believe that humanity is in any way obligated to accept your judgment." The chamber erupted again, but this time the cacophony was one of shocked disbelief rather than outrage. "The Council's authority," Kethros said, his voice rising over the noise, "is absolute. Every species in the galaxy recognizes." "We don't," Sarah interrupted. "We never did." She turned to face the assembled representatives, raising her voice so that all could hear. 17 years ago, when your scout ships first entered our system, we were afraid. We looked at your technology, at your vast empires spanning thousands of worlds, and we saw gods descending from the heavens. We accepted your welcome because we believed we had no choice. We took your allocated systems because we thought it was all we could have. We followed your protocols because we didn't know any better." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But that was 17 years ago. We've learned a lot since then." Admiral Stone stepped forward, his hand moving to the secure communication device at his belt. He activated it, and a moment later, another holographic display sprang to life, one that superseded and overwhelmed the Council's own systems. "What you're seeing," Stone announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded fleets in the dark between stars, is a real-time feed from our long-range sensor network. The display showed Nexus Prime from the outside, the gleaming spires of the Council capital, the orbital installations that had floated in this system for 100,000 years, the ancient defense platforms that had never been tested in all that time. And surrounding them all, emerging from faster-than-light transition in perfect, terrible formation, were ships. Human ships. Thousands of them. "I don't understand," Kethros stammered. "Our sensors showed no. We detected nothing." "No," Stone agreed. "You wouldn't have. Your sensor technology is very good. But ours is better." He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "When we first made contact, we studied your ships, your technology, your entire civilization. We learned everything we could. And we discovered something interesting. In 100,000 years of galactic civilization, there hasn't been a major war. A few skirmishes here and there, but nothing serious. Your entire society is built on the assumption that conflicts will be resolved through negotiation and arbitration." His smile was thin and cold. "We found that fascinating because it means that in all that time, no one has ever really pushed you. No one has ever made you fight for survival. Your military technology has stagnated for tens of thousands of years. Your tactics are primitive. Your strategic doctrine is virtually non-existent." The display shifted, showing detailed schematics of Council warships beside human ones. "Your ships are larger than ours. Your weapons have greater raw power. But power means nothing without the ability to deliver it effectively. Your targeting systems are slow. Your shield harmonics are predictable. Your hull configurations are optimized for aesthetics rather than combat survivability." Stone's voice hardened. In the last 17 years, we've analyzed every piece of technology you shared with us. We've reverse-engineered what we couldn't buy, and we've improved on all of it. Your faster-than-light drives? We've increased their efficiency by 300%. Your weapons? We've developed countermeasures for all of them and created new weapons you've never seen. Your sensors? We've figured out how to blind them while remaining invisible ourselves. The chamber had gone utterly silent. The representatives of 1,000 worlds stared at the display with mounting horror as they began to understand what they were seeing. "Those ships you see surrounding your capital," Stone continued, "represent roughly 10% of humanity's current military strength. We call it the First Fleet. It was deployed to Nexus Prime 3 days ago, before we were even aware of this tribunal. We knew something like this was coming. We've had intelligence assets inside the Council for years. We just didn't know the specific timing." Sarah stepped forward again, taking over from the Admiral. "You asked us here to witness your justice, High Arbiter. Instead, I'm afraid you'll be witnessing ours." "You wouldn't dare," Kethros managed. "The Council has stood for 100,000 years. We have allies across the galaxy. If you attack us—" "We're not going to attack you," Sarah said. "Not unless you force us to. We're here to negotiate." She gestured, and the holographic display changed again. This time, it showed a document, text in both Galactic Standard and English, dense with legal language. "This is our counter-proposal. You will drop all charges against humanity. You will recognize our right to colonize any unclaimed system within our sphere of expansion. You will acknowledge our military as a legitimate defensive force. And you will grant us full membership in the Galactic Council with all associated rights and privileges." Kethros's mandibles clacked in what might have been laughter, though there was no humor in it. "And if we refuse?" "Then we leave," Sarah said simply. "We take our fleet and we go home. And the next time we meet, it won't be in a courtroom." She let the implications hang in the air. "You can't threaten the Council," Kethros insisted. "Even if your fleet is as powerful as you claim, we have thousands of worlds, trillions of citizens, resources beyond measure. We would crush you eventually." "Would you?" Sarah asked. "Let's find out." She turned to face the assembled representatives directly. "I'm sure many of you are thinking the same thing. Humanity is one species on one world, well, 20 worlds now, but who's counting? How could we possibly stand against the combined might of the galactic community?" She began to pace, her heels clicking against the ancient stone floor of the chamber. "Let me tell you a story. 75 years ago, before any of you knew we existed, humanity fought a war against itself. We called it World War III, and it lasted for 6 years. By the time it was over, 3 billion people were dead. Half of our planet was irradiated. Our civilization had been pushed to the brink of extinction." She paused, letting the horror of those numbers sink in. 3 billion dead, more than the population of most Council species, snuffed out in a single conflict. "And yet, here we are. We survived. We rebuilt. We reached for the stars. Because that's what humans do. We survive." Her voice took on an edge that made several of the assembled representatives flinch. "You want to know the difference between humans and every other species in this galaxy? It's simple. You evolved in paradise. Your worlds were gentle, nurturing, safe. The worst predators you ever faced were animals that could be outrun or outsmarted with minimal effort." She turned back to face Kethros directly. Earth wasn't like that. Earth was a death world. Our gravity was crushing, our weather was violent, our ecosystems were filled with predators that wanted nothing more than to eat us alive. We evolved not as the dominant species on our planet, but as prey. We were small, weak, slow, with no natural weapons to speak of.
Her smile returned, cold and sharp.
And yet we became the apex predators of our world. Do you know how? Through violence, through cunning, through an absolute refusal to accept death even when it was staring us in the face. We hunted the predators that hunted us. We tamed the wildlands that should have killed us. We built civilizations on the bones of everything that tried to stop us.
She gestured to the fleet still visible on the display.
Every one of those ships is crewed by human beings who carry that legacy in their blood. We are the descendants of survivors, of fighters, of people who looked at impossible odds and said, "Not today." And when you threaten us, when you threaten our homes, our families, our children, you awaken something in us that you cannot begin to comprehend.
"These are merely words," Kethros said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Primitive boasting from a primitive species."
"Then let me offer you proof," Sarah replied. "Admiral, if you please."
Stone nodded and spoke into his communicator. "Prometheus, you are cleared for demonstration. Target, Council Defense Platform 7. On the display, one of the human ships, a vessel that looked impossibly small compared to the ancient, massive defense platforms orbiting Nexus Prime, broke formation and accelerated toward the nearest platform.
"Wait," Kethros commanded. "What are you doing? Those platforms are armed with—"
The platform opened fire. Massive energy beams, each one capable of vaporizing a small moon, lanced out toward the approaching human ship. And missed. Every single shot missed.
The human vessel danced through the barrage like a leaf on the wind, its movements too fast, too unpredictable for the platform's targeting systems to track. It spiraled and spun, juked and weaved, closing the distance with impossible speed.
"Electronic warfare," Stone explained calmly. "We're feeding false sensor data directly into the platform's targeting computers. It literally cannot see where our ship actually is." The human vessel closed to point-blank range, and then nothing happened. The ship simply pulled away, leaving the defense platform intact but thoroughly humiliated. "We could have destroyed it," Stone said. "We chose not to. Consider it a gesture of good faith." The chamber was utterly silent. 1,000 species, many of whom had never seen military action in their entire civilizational history, stared at the display with expressions ranging from shock to terror. Sarah let the silence stretch for a long moment before speaking again. "High Arbiter, we didn't come here to start a war. We came here to end one. The Cold War that has been brewing ever since your species decided to treat mine as inferior. We want peace. We want cooperation. We want to take our rightful place among the stars alongside all of you." She spread her hands in a gesture of openness. "But we will not accept subjugation. We will not surrender our colonies. We will not disarm ourselves. And we will absolutely not allow our homeworld to be placed under foreign administration. If you reject our offer," she continued, "then we walk away from this council, from this galactic community, from everything. We'll build our own empire, in our own space, by our own rules. And if anyone tries to stop us—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. The display, still showing the First Fleet in all its deadly glory, finished it for her. Kethros turned to consult with his fellow arbiters,
Ancient beings who had served on the council for thousands of years, who had never faced a challenge like this in all their long lives. Their whispered conversation went on for several minutes, while the representatives of 1,000 worlds watched in stunned silence. Finally, Kathros turned back to face the human delegation. "Your proposal," he said, clearly struggling with the word, "will be taken under advisement. The council requires time to deliberate." "Of course," said Sarah graciously. "Take all the time you need. Our fleet will remain in orbit as a reminder of the importance of these deliberations." She turned to leave, Stone and Tanaka falling into step behind her. But before she reached the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "One more thing, High Arbiter, about that planet, Sanctuary 7. Kathros stiffened. "Yes?" "We didn't cause the extinction of those pre-sapient beings. We studied them extensively before we established any settlements. They died out 3,000 years ago, victims of a natural climate shift that your observers apparently failed to notice. Our scientists have detailed records, if you'd like to see them." She smiled one last time. Perhaps, in the future, the council should verify its accusations before passing judgment. And with that, Ambassador Sarah Chen and her delegation walked out of the chamber, leaving 1,000 worlds to contemplate the terrifying new reality they had just been introduced to. The deliberations took 6 months. During that time, the First Fleet maintained its position around Nexus Prime, a constant reminder of humanity's newfound power. Other human fleets deployed throughout Council space, positioning themselves at strategic locations. Not threatening exactly, but certainly present, watching. The Council was divided. Some species, the Nexari, the Vorthax, a handful of others who had benefited most from the existing order, pushed for war. They argued that humanity must be crushed now, before their power grew any further, before they became a truly existential threat. Others counseled caution. They had studied the displays from the tribunal, analyzed the performance of human ships, and reached troubling conclusions. The human fleet was not merely powerful, it was revolutionary. Humanity had achieved in less than 2 decades what the Council's most advanced species had failed to accomplish in millennia: genuine innovation in military technology. And if they could do that with weapons, what else might they be capable of? But it was the third faction, the pragmatists, who ultimately carried the day. Led by a species called the Tellurian, whose cold, calculating logic had made them the galaxy's foremost economists and strategists, they presented a simple argument. War with humanity would be expensive. Even if the Council won, and that was far from certain, the cost would be staggering. Trillions of lives, countless worlds devastated, the carefully balanced galactic economy thrown into chaos. The Tellurian had run the numbers, and the numbers were terrifying. But peace with humanity? That offered possibilities. If human innovation could be channeled, directed, integrated into the galactic community, the benefits could be incalculable. And so, after 6 months of bitter debate, the Council voted. The charges against humanity were dropped. Humanity's colonial holdings were recognized as legitimate territories. Humanity's military was acknowledged as a defensive force operating within acceptable parameters. And humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all associated rights and privileges. The vote was close, closer than anyone liked to admit. But it passed, and with that passage, everything changed. Ambassador Sarah Chen returned to Earth a hero. The story of her confrontation with the Council had spread across human space like wildfire. People who had spent their entire lives feeling small and insignificant in the face of ancient alien civilizations suddenly stood a little taller, spoke a little louder. Their species had been threatened with extinction, and they had responded not with fear, but with defiance. The celebrations lasted for days. In every city on every human world, there were parades and parties, speeches and songs. For the first time since first contact, humanity felt like it truly belonged among the stars. But Sarah knew the truth. This wasn't a victory. It was merely an opening move. The Council had backed down, yes, but they hadn't forgotten. They hadn't forgiven. The old powers of the galaxy were already plotting, already scheming, looking for ways to undermine human influence, to sabotage human expansion, to put the upstart species back in its place. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. She tried to explain this to anyone who would listen. In meetings with Earth's united government, in briefings with the military command, in interviews with the press. But no one wanted to hear it. They wanted to celebrate. They wanted to feel safe. They wanted to believe that the hard part was over. Sarah understood. She even sympathized. But understanding didn't change the reality of the situation. The Council had been humiliated. In a civilization built on face and precedent, that humiliation would not be allowed to stand. Somewhere, in some chamber even more secret than the one where she had made her stand, plans were being made. And when those plans came to fruition, humanity would need to be ready. The first strike came 3 years later. It wasn't a military attack. The Council had learned that lesson well. Instead, it was economic, a coordinated effort by a dozen major species to crash the interstellar trade networks that humanity had become dependent upon. It started small. A few shipping contracts canceled here, some tariffs raised there. Nothing that couldn't be explained away as normal market fluctuations. But the pattern was unmistakable if you knew where to look. And Sarah knew where to look. She had spent the years since the tribunal building an intelligence network that spanned the galaxy. Human agents, some diplomats, some merchants, some operating under covers so deep they had almost forgotten their true identities, had infiltrated the power structures of 100 different species. They listened, they watched, they reported back. When the economic attack began, Sarah knew about it within hours. The response she organized was swift and brutal. Human corporations, acting on carefully crafted instructions, began dumping commodities onto the galactic market at prices so low that their competitors couldn't match them. Human ships, carrying goods that the sanctioning species desperately needed, mysteriously appeared at non-council ports, offering deals too good to refuse. Human banks, flush with resources from the expanded colonial territories, offered loans to developing species at rates that undercut the established financial institutions by orders of magnitude. Within 6 months, the economic attack had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. A dozen species that had joined the sanctions now found themselves dependent on human trade. The financial institutions that had led the assault were bleeding money, and the Council's reputation for economic invincibility had been shattered. It was, as one human economist gleefully noted, the free market in action. The Council had tried to use economics as a weapon, and humanity had proven that they were better at that game too. But Sarah knew this was just the first salvo. The Council would try again. And again, and again. They would probe for weaknesses, search for vulnerabilities, test humanity's resolve in every arena they could think of. The only question was whether humanity would be ready for what came next. The answer came 5 years after the tribunal, when Admiral Marcus Stone received a priority transmission from deep space. He was aboard the flagship of the Second Fleet at the time, conducting routine patrols along the edge of human territory.
The transmission cut through all encryption, all security protocols, all the safeguards that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion. The face that appeared on his screen was Nexari, High Arbiter Kethros himself. "Admiral Stone," Kethros said, "I hope this message finds you well." Stone's expression didn't change, but his hand moved slowly toward the alert button. "Hi, Arbiter. This is an unexpected pleasure." "I'm sure it is. I'll be brief. In approximately 6 hours, a fleet will emerge from faster-than-light transit in the Epsilon Eridani system. That fleet will consist of 300 warships from a species called the Zethran." Stone frowned. "I've never heard of them." "No, you wouldn't have. The Zethran were removed from the galactic community 40,000 years ago, sealed within their home system by barriers of our creation. They were deemed too dangerous, too aggressive, too human, if you'll forgive the comparison." "And now they're free?" "Now they're free." Kethros's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark amusement. "It seems someone deactivated the containment barriers. Someone who wanted to see how humanity would fare against a species that shares your predilections." Stone felt cold rage building in his chest. "You did this." "I did nothing," Kethros replied. "I am merely informing you, as a courtesy between allies, of a threat to your territory. What you do with this information is entirely your affair." "And if we fail to stop them?" "Then the Zethran will sweep through human space like a plague, destroying everything in their path. They will reach Earth within a matter of weeks, and they will reduce your homeworld to rubble." Kethros paused. "Or so I would assume. As I said, I am merely the messenger." The transmission cut off. Stone stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he reached for the alert button. "All hands, battle stations. We have incoming hostiles." The Battle of Epsilon Eridani would be remembered as the moment humanity truly came of age. The Zethran were everything Kethros had promised: savage, relentless, driven by 40,000 years of pent-up rage against the galaxy that had imprisoned them. Their ships were crude compared to human vessels, but they were numerous, and their crews were utterly fearless. The Second Fleet was outnumbered 3-1. By all conventional military wisdom, they should have retreated, called for reinforcements, regrouped for a counterattack. Stone didn't retreat. "They've been locked in a box for 40 millennia," he told his officers as the Zethran fleet bore down on them. "They're angry and they're dangerous, but they haven't fought anyone new in longer than human civilization has existed. They have no idea what they're up against." He was right. The battle lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of brutal, close-quarters ship-to-ship combat, of missile barrages and energy beam salvos, of electronic warfare and boarding actions. The Zethran fought with terrifying fury, but they fought without coordination, without adaptation, without the creativity that humans had honed through millennia of warfare against each other. Stone exploited every weakness. He used the terrain of the system's asteroid belt to ambush the larger Zethran vessels. He coordinated hit-and-run attacks that drew the enemy into overlapping fields of fire. He deployed electronic countermeasures that left entire Zethran squadrons flying blind. And when conventional tactics failed, he improvised. In one memorable incident, a human frigate whose weapons had been disabled rammed itself into the engine section of a Zethran battleship, crippling it with kinetic impact alone. The crew survived, barely, by riding out the collision in emergency acceleration couches designed for exactly such a desperate maneuver. When the battle was over, 247 Zethran ships had been destroyed.
53 more had surrendered, a concept that seemed to confuse them, as if the idea of defeat without death was completely foreign to their culture. The Second Fleet had lost 31 ships, 1,417 human lives. It was a victory, a costly, bloody, terrible victory, but a victory nonetheless. And when news of it spread across the galaxy, the balance of power shifted once again. The Council called an emergency session. This time, humanity wasn't summoned. They demanded to attend. Ambassador Chen led the delegation once more, but she was no longer the same woman who had stood defiant in this chamber 5 years ago. There were new lines on her face, a weight in her eyes that spoke of battles fought and friends lost. She had aged more in those 5 years than in the previous 30. But her spine was still straight and her voice was still strong. "High Arbiter," she said, addressing Kethros with icy politeness, "humanity wishes to register a formal complaint." Kethros's mandibles twitched. A complaint? Indeed, someone deactivated the containment barriers around the Zethran homeworld. Someone released a species that you yourselves deemed too dangerous to exist in the galactic community. And someone did this knowing that the Zethran would immediately attack the nearest inhabited systems, which happened to be human colonies. She paused, letting her words sink in. "We have investigated this matter thoroughly. Our intelligence assets have traced the deactivation signal to its source. Would you like to know what we found?" The chamber was utterly silent. "We found," Sarah continued, "that the signal originated from a secure council facility on Nexus Prime itself. A facility that, according to official records, was decommissioned 30,000 years ago. A facility that, in reality, has been used for centuries to conduct operations that the Council prefers not to acknowledge." She produced a data crystal and placed it on the speaker's podium. This crystal contains the full evidence package: transmission logs, sensor data, testimony from individuals who were involved in the planning of this operation. It proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the release of the Zethran was authorized by elements within the Council itself. Kethros rose from his throne, his 4 eyes blazing with fury. "These accusations are outrageous! The Council would never—" "The Council," Sarah interrupted, "has been trying to destroy humanity ever since we dared to stand up for ourselves. First with legal proceedings, then with economic warfare, now with biological weapons. Because make no mistake, that's what the Zethran were. You released them specifically because you thought they would succeed where your other methods had failed." She smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "You were wrong." The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives of 1,000 species shouted accusations and denials, demanded evidence and counter-evidence, called for investigations and cover-ups. The carefully maintained order of the Council dissolved into pandemonium. Through it all, Sarah stood perfectly still, waiting. When the noise finally died down, she spoke again. "Humanity is not interested in revenge. We are not interested in war. We proved at Epsilon Eridani that we can defend ourselves against anything you throw at us, and we would prefer not to have to do so again." She looked directly at Kethros. "What we want is simple. We want the Council to stop trying to destroy us. We want to be treated as equals, not as threats to be eliminated. We want the same respect and consideration that you give to every other species in this chamber." Her voice hardened. "And we want the individuals responsible for the Zethran release to be brought to justice. Not council justice, human justice. They committed an act of war against our people, and our people will decide their fate." Kethros's mandibles clicked furiously. "You would have us hand over our own citizens to face alien judgment?" "I would have you acknowledge that your actions have consequences," Sarah replied. "For 100,000 years, the Council has operated under the assumption that it is above accountability. That assumption ends today." She gestured, and once again the holographic display came to life. But this time it didn't show human ships. It showed something else entirely. Weapons. Massive, terrible weapons, the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. Planetoid-sized installations bristling with energy projectors. Autonomous kill swarms capable of dismantling entire fleets. Antimatter warheads that could crack worlds like eggs. "We call this the Prometheus Arsenal," Sarah said quietly. "It represents 10 years of research and development, funded by every human world and staffed by the brightest minds our species has produced. It is humanity's insurance policy against extinction." She turned to face the assembled representatives. "We hope we never have to use it. We hope that the Council will see reason, will accept us as equals, will choose cooperation over conflict. But if that hope proves false..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The display showed enough. "You have one standard cycle to respond to our demands," Sarah concluded. "After that, we will draw our own conclusions about the Council's intentions." She turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving 1,000 worlds to contemplate their future. The Council surrendered. There was no other word for it. Oh, they dressed it up in diplomatic language, called it a comprehensive restructuring of the galactic order and a new era of interspecies cooperation. But everyone knew the truth. Humanity had won. The individuals responsible for the Zethran release, including High Arbiter Kethros himself, were handed over for trial. They were found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to life imprisonment on a penal colony in the outer reaches of human space. Some said the sentence was too lenient. Others argued that any punishment was better than the impunity the Council had enjoyed for so long. The Council itself was reformed. New protocols were established, giving every member species, including humanity, an equal voice in governance. The old system of developmental tiers and expansion limits was abolished. The era of ancient powers dictating terms to younger species was over. And humanity. Humanity flourished. In the decades that followed, human colonies spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Human technology, no longer constrained by Council regulations, advanced at a pace that left even the most ancient species struggling to keep up. Human culture, human art, human ideas infiltrated every corner of civilized space. Some welcomed the change. They saw humanity as a breath of fresh air, a dynamic force that had been exactly what the stagnant galactic civilization needed. They embraced human trade, human innovation, human ways of thinking. Others resented it. They saw humanity as conquerors, as usurpers, as destroyers of a way of life that had endured for 100,000 years. They formed resistance movements, terrorist cells, secret societies dedicated to undermining human influence. Ambassador Sarah Chen spent the rest of her life navigating between these extremes. She worked tirelessly to build bridges, to foster understanding, to prove that humanity could be trusted with the power it had seized. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she failed, but she never stopped trying. On the day of her retirement, 60 years after the original tribunal, she gave one final speech. By then she was old, her hair white and her face lined with the marks of a lifetime of struggle. but her eyes still burned with the same fire that had faced down the council all those years ago. "When I was young," she said, "humanity looked up at the stars and saw infinity. We saw possibility. We saw a future without limits." She paused, looking out at the assembly of human and alien dignitaries who had come to honor her. "Then we made first contact, and we learned that the universe was already full. We learned that ancient powers had carved up the cosmos long before we were born, leaving nothing for newcomers but scraps and servitude. We learned that our dreams of infinity were just that, dreams." Her voice strengthened. "But we didn't accept that lesson. We refused to be limited. We refused to be subjugated. We refused to be anything less than what we knew we could become." She smiled, and for a moment the weight of years seemed to lift from her shoulders. That refusal, that stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal, is what makes us human. It's what drove us out of the caves and across the oceans. It's what carried us to the moon and to Mars and to the stars beyond. And it's what will carry us forward into whatever future awaits us. She raised her glass. To humanity, to stubbornness, to refusing to accept the limits others try to impose on us, to proving, again and again, that the only limits that matter are the ones we set for ourselves. The assembly rose to its feet, 1,000 voices joining hers in the toast. To humanity. 50 years after Ambassador Chen's retirement, a human ship encountered something unprecedented at the edge of explored space. The vessel was called the Pathfinder, a deep space exploration craft on a routine survey mission. Its captain was a young woman named Elena Vasquez, barely 30 years old, but already a veteran of a dozen first contact situations. What the Pathfinder found wasn't a first contact. It was something far more significant. A structure, massive beyond comprehension, its surface area greater than most planets. Ancient beyond measurement, its construction predating the oldest civilizations in the galaxy by millions, perhaps billions of years. And active. After eons of dormancy, something had woken it up. Captain Vasquez led the first boarding party herself. What they found inside defied explanation. Technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. Artifacts whose purpose couldn't be guessed, and everywhere, writing in a language that no translator could parse. It took months of study before they made the breakthrough. Dr. James Wright, the Pathfinder's chief xenolinguist, finally cracked enough of the ancient script to translate a single passage. When he did, he went pale. "What does it say?" Vasquez demanded. Wright looked up at her with haunted eyes. "It's a warning," he said, "left by whoever built this place millions of years ago. A warning about something they encountered, something that forced them to build this structure and then disappear." "What kind of warning?" Wright handed her the translation. Vasquez read it once, then again, then a third time, her hands beginning to tremble. "Get me a quantum comlink," she ordered. "Priority 1. I need to speak to Earth Command." "Captain, we're months away from the nearest relay. A quantum link from here would drain our entire power reserve." "I don't care. Do it." The message she sent was brief. The response it generated was anything but. Within a year, 100 human ships had converged on the structure. Scientists from every discipline, military officers from every branch, diplomats from every human world. The Council sent observers too, at humanity's invitation, a gesture of good faith that was also a subtle reminder of how far things had changed since the days of the tribunal. Together, they began the long, painstaking process of deciphering the ancient builder's legacy. What they learned changed everything. The galaxy, it turned out,
was not empty before the council races arose. It had been home to an empire so vast, so powerful, that the current galactic civilization was nothing but a footnote by comparison. An empire that had spanned millions of worlds, that had unlocked the secrets of time and space and reality itself. An empire that had been destroyed. The threat that ended them had come from beyond the galaxy, from the void between stars, from the cold emptiness that surrounded all of creation. The ancient builders had fought against it, had thrown everything they had against it, and in the end, they had barely managed to drive it back. But they hadn't destroyed it. They couldn't. The threat was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting. The structure was a watchpost, a warning system designed to alert future civilizations when the threat returned. And it had just activated. The Council of Nine met in emergency session. Not the old council, with its thousands of species and Byzantine politics, but the new one, a streamlined body consisting of the 9 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, humanity among them. Admiral James Stone, grandson of Marcus Stone, hero of Epsilon Eridani, presented the tactical assessment. Based on the ancient records, we estimate the threat will reach galactic space in approximately 50 years. That gives us half a century to prepare. Prepare for what, exactly? Asked the Tellurian representative, its crystalline form pulsing with agitated light. We still don't fully understand what we're facing. We know it destroyed a civilization that makes ours look like children playing with blocks, Stone replied. We know it's been dormant for millions of years, which means it's patient. And we know it's coming. He activated the holographic display, showing the vast reaches of intergalactic space. We have 2 options. We can wait for it to arrive and hope we can fight it off, or we can go out to meet it on our terms at a location of our choosing. You're suggesting we take the offensive? The Vorthax representative's tendrils writhed in what might have been disbelief. Against a threat that annihilated the greatest empire in galactic history? I'm suggesting we don't sit here waiting to die, Stone said. The ancient builders failed because they tried to defend everything. They spread themselves too thin, tried to protect every world, every installation, every life. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. He looked around the chamber, meeting each representative's gaze in turn. We won't make that mistake. We'll concentrate our forces, hit hard and hit fast. We'll find the threat's point of origin and destroy it before it can reach full strength. And if we fail? The Tellurian asked. Stone smiled. The same thin, cold smile his grandfather had worn in this very chamber a lifetime ago. Then we'll fail fighting instead of cowering, but we won't fail. The debate lasted for weeks. There were those who counseled caution, those who advocated for defensive preparations, those who argued that the threat might not be as severe as the ancient records suggested. But in the end, Stone's argument carried the day. The galaxy would not wait for death to come to it. It would go out to meet death on its own terms. The United Fleet, the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history, comprising ships from every species in the Council of Nine, launched 3 years later. 10,000 warships, crewed by millions of beings from hundreds of worlds, armed with the most advanced weapons that 50,000 years of galactic civilization could produce. At its heart, leading the charge, was the human contingent. 1,000 ships, each one a marvel of engineering, each one crewed by men and women who had grown up on stories of humanity's defiance, humanity's courage, humanity's refusal to accept defeat.
Admiral Stone commanded from the bridge of the flagship Prometheus, named for the human of legend who had stolen fire from the gods. It was fitting, he thought, that they would carry that name into battle against a threat that had destroyed gods.
The journey took years. Faster-than-light travel could only do so much against the vast distances between galaxies. The fleet crossed millions of light-years, venturing further from home than any galactic civilization had ever gone before. What they found when they arrived was beyond anything they had imagined. The threat was not a fleet. It was not an army. It was not even a civilization in any sense that they understood. It was a presence, a vast, incomprehensible intelligence that existed in the space between dimensions, that perceived reality in ways that made even the most advanced council science look like cave paintings. It had destroyed the ancient empire, not through conquest, but through simple existence. Its very presence was anathema to life as the galaxy knew it. And it was awake. The first engagement lasted 3 minutes. In that time, the United Fleet lost 400 ships. Not destroyed, erased, as if they had never existed, wiped from reality by weapons that didn't attack matter or energy, but the fundamental laws of physics themselves. Admiral Stone watched the casualties mount and made a decision. All ships, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. We need to regroup, analyze what we're dealing with. But even as he gave the order, he knew it might already be too late. The threat was moving, accelerating toward the galaxy they had left behind. At its current speed, it would reach galactic space in months, not years. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. The message reached Earth 6 months later. By then, the population of the galaxy knew what was coming. The United Fleet had sent continuous updates during their voyage, sharing everything they had learned about the threat. When those updates abruptly stopped, everyone knew what it meant. The fleet had failed. The threat was coming, and there was nowhere to hide. The panic that followed was worse than anything in galactic history. Species that had been spacefaring for millennia reverted to their most primitive instincts. Some fled their homeworlds, trying desperately to outrun an enemy that moved faster than light. Others turned on each other, ancient rivalries flaring into open warfare as the veneer of civilization crumbled. But not humanity. When the news reached Earth, President Isabella Chen, great-great-granddaughter of Ambassador Sarah Chen, whose legacy had shaped human policy for a century, addressed the species. "We have received word that the United Fleet has been defeated," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was announcing. "The threat we hoped to stop is now heading for our galaxy. It will arrive within months." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Many of you are afraid. That fear is natural, and it is justified. We are facing something beyond our comprehension, something that destroyed a civilization greater than anything we can imagine." Her voice hardened. "But we are humans. Fear does not define us. Fear does not control us. When our ancestors faced extinction, they did not cower. They fought. When our grandparents faced subjugation, they did not surrender. They stood defiant. And when we face the end of everything we know..." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes burning with the same fire that had blazed in Sarah Chen's eyes a century ago. "We will not go quietly." The Prometheus arsenal, the ultimate insurance policy that humanity had constructed and then hoped never to use, was activated. Weapons that had been theoretical became reality. Defenses that had been planned became operational. And humanity, with nothing left to lose, prepared to fight for its survival one last time. But even as the preparations reached their peak, even as the galaxy braced for the end, something unexpected happened. The threat stopped. 3 light-years from the galactic rim, the vast, incomprehensible presence that had destroyed empires and ended civilizations simply stopped moving. It hung there in the void, silent and still, for days that stretched into weeks. And then it sent a message. The message was not in any language. It was not in any format that galactic technology could immediately process. It was something else entirely, a direct transmission into the minds of every sapient being in the galaxy, bypassing all barriers of distance and translation. We have observed. We have assessed. We find you unexpected. The mental pressure of the message was staggering. Billions of beings across the galaxy collapsed under its weight, overwhelmed by contact with an intelligence so vast that their minds could barely process its existence. But not all of them collapsed. Here and there, scattered across 1,000 worlds, individuals stood against the mental onslaught and pushed back. Most of them were human. We have erased civilizations beyond counting. Each one sought to appease us, to bargain with us, to flee from us. All failed. You did not. You came to meet us. You attacked us. There was something in the message that might have been surprise, might have been interest. We wish to understand. Explain. Admiral Stone, his mind burning with the effort of maintaining coherent thought under the mental pressure, found himself responding. "We're humans," he said. "We don't surrender. We don't flee. We fight." "Even when fighting is futile?" "There's no such thing as futile," Stone replied. "There's only giving up before you've tried everything." A long silence. Then, "The Ancient Ones believed they could destroy us. They could not. We are eternal. We are infinite. We exist beyond your concepts of space and time. And yet you challenge us." "Yes." "Why?" Stone thought about his grandfather, facing down the council with nothing but a fleet and a refusal to surrender. He thought about Sarah Chen, standing alone in a chamber full of ancient powers and daring them to do their worst. He thought about every human who had ever faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. "Because that's who we are," he said. "Because we would rather die standing than live kneeling. Because every time something has tried to destroy us, nature, each other, the council, you, we've found a way to survive." He paused. "And because even if we can't beat you, even if you wipe us out like you wiped out the ancients, we'll hurt you. We'll make you remember us. 1,000,000,000 years from now, when you encounter some other species that dares to fight back, you'll think of us." Another silence, longer this time. Then, slowly, the presence began to recede. The mental pressure eased. The vast intelligence withdrew, pulling back across the void toward whatever dimension it called home. But before it went, it sent one final message. You are different. We will watch. We will return in time to see what you become. Do not disappoint us. And then it was gone. Humanity survived. The galaxy survived. In the years that followed, the Council of Nine became the Council of Unity, a true partnership of equals dedicated to preparing for the eventual return of the threat from beyond. Human innovation, combined with the vast resources and ancient wisdom of the other species, drove unprecedented advances in technology, in science, in the understanding of the universe itself. New structures were built, watch posts like the one the Pathfinder had discovered, but greater and more sophisticated. New weapons were developed, weapons designed not merely to fight the threat, but to understand it, to find its weaknesses, to discover some way to end it once and for all. And across the galaxy, the story of humanity's defiance spread.
How they had stood against the Council when the Council tried to crush them. How they had defeated the Zethran when the Zethran were unleashed to destroy them. How they had challenged an incomprehensible cosmic entity and earned its respect through sheer stubborn refusal to admit defeat.
The story became legend. The legend became myth. And the myth shaped the future. 10,000 years after the standoff at the galactic rim, the threat returned. But this time, the galaxy was ready. 10,000 species, united under a single banner, met the presence at the edge of reality. They fought with weapons that bent the laws of physics, with strategies developed over millennia, with courage that burned brighter than any star. And at the heart of the fleet, leading the charge as their ancestors had always led, were humans. The battle lasted for years, perhaps centuries. Time itself became uncertain in the presence of the threat. But in the end, against all odds, against all logic, against everything that reason and experience suggested was possible, they won. The threat was not destroyed. Such a thing might have been beyond any power in the universe, but it was driven back, sealed away behind barriers that would hold for eternity. The galaxy was safe. And standing at the center of it all, battered and bloodied but unbroken, was humanity. The species that had clawed its way up from the mud of a death world. The species that had been dismissed as primitives, as children, as a nuisance to be dealt with and forgotten. The species that had faced gods and empires and cosmic horrors and refused, every single time, to bow. On 1,000 worlds, monuments were raised to human courage. In 1,000,000 schools, children of every species learned the story of humanity's rise. And across the galaxy, a single phrase became synonymous with defiance in the face of impossible odds. They're only human. It was meant, once, as a dismissal, a way of pointing out humanity's weakness, its vulnerability, its insignificance in the grand scheme of things. Now, it was a warning. Because if there was one thing the galaxy had learned, one truth that had been proven again and again through blood and fire and sacrifice, it was this. There was no such thing as only human. There was just human. Stubborn, impossible, magnificent human. The species that couldn't be broken, couldn't be conquered, couldn't be erased. The species that, when the universe itself tried to snuff them out, responded with unmatched force. And won.